going on YouTube? This is Technology Mafia, and before I get started, I just want to say thank you, because yesterday I hit 10,000 subscribers, which is just amazing. Never thought that would happen. So thank you for each and every one of you who supports this channel, who watches the videos. Today I am going to do a comparison between two lenses. It is the Sigma 30mm f1.4 DCDN contemporary lens versus the Sony SEL35 f1.8. Before we get started by looking at sample photos, I want to show you both of these lenses side by side so you get a sense of what they look like and how big they are. Here are the two lenses next to each other. The Sony lens is on the left and the Sigma lens is on the right. And you could see right away the size difference. The Sigma lens is almost twice as large as the Sony. There it is from the front. You can see how much bigger the opening is on the Sigma as well. Very interesting. The back, if you are carrying it around, the Sigma lens will take up more space. Let's take a look at sample images. Alright, so I'm going to start with a portrait of my wife. This is the Sony lens at ISO 1000, f1.8 and 1/60th of a second. So you can see the image has nice bokeh. These shots were taken right around sunset, so there isn't that much light out. However, both of these lenses are fast, so they should do just fine. Here is the Sigma lens. As you could see, at 30mm, it is wider than the Sony. This shot is at ISO 640, f1.4, 1/60th of a second. So because this lens lets in more light, you can shoot an image with a lower ISO setting, which in theory should make your shot sharper. You can see that the Sigma has more contrasty colors, so they're a little warmer. The Sony colors are not as warm, but both images are nice. If you take a 100% crop of the Sony, you can see just how well the lens focuses on the subject, as well as how nice the bokeh looks. With the Sigma, same thing, very, very good focus, subject separation, and the bokeh looks very nice. Here is another portrait shot. This is the Sony lens, this time at ISO 500, f1.8, 1/60th of a second. The Sigma image was shot at ISO 320, f1.4, 1/60th of a second. Side by side, the Sony colors are more stark, more cold. The Sigma colors are warmer, which is surprising because going into this test, I really thought that the Sony would have the warmer skin tones, warmer colors overall. So I wanted to see which of these lenses was sharper. So in both of these images, the settings are the exact same. So ISO 1600 for both lenses. I shot them at f5.6 and 1/60th of a second. So the Sony image is here. The Sigma image is here, obviously a little wider. Now you can't really tell side by side which one of these images is sharper. So let's zoom in 100% on the Sony image and do the same thing with the Sigma. So I still can't really tell a difference between these two images. So let's go 200% on the Sony and the same thing 200% on the Sigma. Very little difference. If I had to give a slight edge, I would give it to the Sigma lens, but it's 95 to 96%, that close. So these next two shots also demonstrate sharpness. Now pay particular attention to the black letters in this image. So you could see that the Sony ones aren't terrible, but when you compare them to the Sigma letters at ISO 2500, they are noticeably sharper. Now the trade-off with this is that the Sigma lens does suffer from barrel distortion. So this image shows you how much barrel distortion there really is. The top part is the Sony, and as you can see where the image cuts off, the gray brick lines up perfectly. The bottom image is the Sigma, and you could see that there is a curvature to the brick. It comes up on either side. Fortunately for the Sony lens, the images are adjusted in body, so if you are planning on just snapping photos and using the Wi-Fi feature to download them to your phone and then uploading them, in theory the Sony lens will always give you an image that has less distortion. The Sigma lens distortion can be corrected in post-processing quite easily using a program such as Adobe Lightroom. Next image, this is a 150% crop of a ring. This is the Sony lens at ISO 500, f1.8, 1/60th of a second. Now, the thing that I want you to pay attention to is just the graininess, or in the Sony's case, the lack of graininess in this image. So the bokeh is creamy, it's smooth, and this cactus that the ring is on is also very smooth. When you compare that to the Sigma image, you could see that there is significantly more grain, even though the lens was shot at ISO 320 instead of ISO 500, which didn't make much sense to me. I don't know how to explain this particular difference. Side by side, if you zoom all the way out, you can see that the Sigma lens has warmer colors, as I mentioned before. However, both images have nice and creamy bokeh, and the subject is in focus. In this case, the ring is in focus in both images. For the last shot, I wanted to demonstrate low light performance for each of these lenses. So in this case, I shot both the Sony lens and the Sigma lens in manual mode with the exact same settings, handheld. So here's the Sony image. This is at ISO 6400. And as you can see, it does a decent job. Now, while the Sigma did hunt a little more at night, I was able to capture this shot handheld. And as you can see, it is a little bit brighter than the Sony because of the f1.4 aperture. But both images are equally impressive when you consider that they were shot indoors in such poor conditions. So what is the conclusion? I took some notes so I don't forget anything. So optically, the Sigma is a superior lens. When you nail the focus, it is a slightly sharper lens, but we're talking 90% to 95%. If I gave the Sony lens a 9 out of 10, I'd give the Sigma a 9.5 out of 10. The Sigma has a smoother focusing ring, and because it's larger, it's easier to grip. So if you are planning on manually focusing your lens, the Sigma is the better choice. I also prefer the focal distance of the Sigma. The 30mm focal distance is slightly wider than the 35, and it actually is easier to use if you're out shooting street photography, and it looks great for portraits as well. The colors on the Sigma lens are better. They have slightly more contrast, and they just seem a little bit more warm. The last positive is price. The Sigma lens is about $300 to $330 in comparison to the Sony SEL35, which is around $400, sometimes as high as $450. So you are saving about $100 by choosing the Sigma over the Sony. So the question at the end of all of this is, which lens am I going to keep? Because I'm only going to keep one. And the answer is surprisingly the Sony. There are a couple of reasons for this. The first thing is focusing. While on the Sigma lens, I've noticed that the focusing is snappier than any non-Sony E-mount lens that I've tried before, it still is slower than the 35mm Sony. In addition, the accuracy is nowhere near as good. I'd say that about 70% of my shots with the Sigma on autofocus were correctly focused, whereas I'd give the Sony about 90% focus accuracy with all of my shots. The second thing is optical steady shot. The Sony has optical steady shot, the Sigma lens does not have that. What that means is that if you're using the camera handheld to take a picture or to do video, the Sony lens will produce sharper images and more fluid video. Now, if you're planning on using this lens on something like the Sony a6500, which has in-body image stabilization, that point doesn't really matter. The third thing is the focus motor on the Sigma lens is slightly louder, so if you aren't using an external microphone, that may be an issue for you. So the last point is just the size. The Sigma lens is obviously much bigger and slightly heavier than the Sony 35. In fact, I'm leaving for Hong Kong in a few hours, and I'm taking the Sony with me just because of that point, just because it's a smaller and easier to package lens. And when you're carrying it around all day in the city, you'll be thankful for the smaller size. So that is it for this video. I hope you guys found it useful. If you did, please hit that like button. If you aren't subscribed, be sure to subscribe by clicking the subscribe button. Stay tuned for future videos. Got some interesting things coming up. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a nice day. Bye-bye.